Hey, everybody.
Hi.
I'm here with Mallory, my best friend. And Mallory is a social worker and a registered behavior technician. I am an educator, behavior analyst, and advocate. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to support families. So I'll start. Just going to have Mallory tell us a little bit about herself, where she's from, her degrees, her background, hobbies when she's not at work.
Yeah, so I'm Mallory. I grew up in Maine. I got my undergraduate bachelor's in social work from Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont, where I lived for 7 years working with a diverse group of people, all the way from young children to mothers facing dual diagnosis, immigrants, high risk families, and everyone in between. And then I got my master's degree from the University of New England in social work before moving to New Hampshire. My hobby, I love quilting and being Becca's best friend.
I like that. That's one of your hobbies.
It's definitely one of my hobbies.
I'm Rebecca Beaudet. Becca. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I've never lived outside of the state. I currently live in New Hampshire with my husband, Paul. When I went to undergraduate school at Keene State College, I studied a dual major in early childhood education and sociology. It was in my senior year student teaching at an inclusive preschool that I found my calling to supporting disabled preschoolers, and I really fell in love with the special ed world. So I pursued my master's degree in education at UNH, and I studied early childhood special ed. I also did a graduate certificate in assistive technology so I could better support my students. And after 5 years of teaching public school special ed, I decided to go back to school again because I can't get enough. I'm a lifelong learner. And I decided to go back for applied behavior analysis. At the time, I didn't know a ton about ABA, but I knew that it was a philosophy and a science that was used a lot to support autistic clients and students. And that was one of my favorite populations of students to work with. So I wanted to see what it was all about and see if I could add more tools to my toolbox to support students. And then in my free time, hiking, backpacking, traveling, pretty much find me in the woods. That's where I'll be. All right, Mallory, what are some of the barriers children and families might face?
There are so many barriers that children and families might face, especially in, rural New Hampshire. There is limited access to resources. And if there are resources, there are also limited ways to access that. Both of us coming from insurance based resources and programs, insurance can be a barrier.
Yes.
Transportation is a barrier. Families having other responsibilities besides working with meeting these needs is a barrier. Jobs are important. Other responsibilities are very important. There's so many barriers. It's hard to list them all. I do want to highlight that there's a lot of opportunities too. I think one of the things we're going to see coming out of the pandemic is a lot more people getting comfortable and offering telehealth.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that with that moving forward, we can start to break down those barriers, but there's no shortage.
Right. I like what you said about telehealth really breaking down barriers, because I know that there are times when telehealth is not the best fit for some clients, but I think it does address some of those issues of like transportation, because you could maybe do it from your home. Even if you don't have a computer, a lot of people are going online on their phones or using their phone data to do that. So I think it eliminates some of the issues of transportation or just being out in the middle of nowhere in the boonies, and accessing services. I know you had also talked to me before about long wait lists, which is something we see a ton in the small state of New Hampshire, and I think across the country right now, but in particular, smaller, more rural states. Like there's so few places offering assessments and evaluations, and then the services that come after those assessments and evaluations. I've heard parents say as long as 18 months sometimes on
sometimes
wait
even
lists.
longer, depending. And then you have to, our kids don't exist in a bubble and our families don't exist in a bubble. So they might be seeking more. And one of the things we're going to talk about is collaborating with different care providers. So they could be going to OT in Concord, but then have speech in Manchester and like other services
driving
somewhere
all over
else.
the state.
And that's a full-time job within itself.
Right. And then if parents are not, or families are not in a position sometimes for someone to stay home with the kids. So how do you balance all that with your job? And as you said, other responsibilities.
Yeah.
You have to run the household and keep the house clean, and then still have time for your own self-care. Yeah. There's a lot of complexities. Some of the other barriers that I had identified, housing insecurity and food insecurity. I know with your social work background, you encountered a lot of families that were working through challenges with substance abuse. Like there's so many things that could be impacting any member of the family or multiple members of the family.
Yeah, and even something I saw a lot in my time where I was in Burlington, it being a sanctuary city, we had a lot of language barriers. And also with it being such a small community, a unique challenge was finding interpreters that also weren't somehow connected to our clients.
Dual relationships.
And trying to find those ways around confidentiality while honoring the client's right to be able to communicate.
That is such an important point. I know in one of the school districts that I was working in, they would sometimes see if like a sibling in the building would come to the IEP meeting of their sibling to translate for the parents. And it's like, yikes, that's really problematic. But as you said, they have a right to access the information in their language. So what do you do when there's that barrier and it's, not the family's fault? It is their right.
And that's another thing that I'm hoping technology can help break down, because we were, even 10 years ago when I was in these positions, I haven't been in that setting in a while. We also did the same thing. And it leaves me feeling an icky feeling, because we are taking away the kid's right to confidentiality. We're also taking away their siblings' right to be a kid.
Yeah.
And to not have that responsibility.
Right.
And I'm hoping that like now with technology, there will be services where you can Zoom in interpreters.
Yes.
And they can be a part of the conversation in a way that's really authentic and also not a family member.
Right.
There's so many opportunities when it comes to technology.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that positive part of the pandemic, because people are exploring all these different platforms. They're hiring remote positions. And when you have a bigger applicant pool, there's a better chance you can find a qualified person to fill those positions. I think we hit most of the barriers that we had at least brainstormed beforehand. I'm sure we're missing many.
I mean, there's hundreds.
Just looking real quick, lack of community or familial support. I know we've encountered that a lot in our careers, particularly around the autistic community. Like families get a diagnosis for their child, and often it's the first time they're learning about autism, and they get this 30, 40 page packet with a medical deficits-based lens. And maybe the last page has links and websites to go to and brochures to read. And then it's just like, oh, we'll see you in a year for the follow-up. And they kind of scoop people out the door. So unless you already know someone in your family, friend circle, a coworker that has an autistic child or family member, this might be your first time. And it's like, who do I talk to? What questions do I have? What questions should I have? So that community piece is so important. And I know later we talk a lot about how social media has created a community for a lot of people.
And I think it's interesting not to like jump ahead or jump around, but I feel like it is like, you get the packet, you have the links, and it's funny how the internet can be such an isolating place, and it also can be such a collaborative community place.
Yes.
Because unless, you get the diagnosis, you have to put yourself out there and find the communities where, if there's people already in your community that that you can go to, who you trust. So I feel like it's probably a different feeling.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that experience is like.
Yeah. I mean, I've only heard it secondhand, but it is such a strange dichotomy. On the one hand, like you said, the social media and internet can like being a collaborative place, and other times it being so lonely. I think it's more like those static websites or content created by people that aren't part of that community that can feel really lonely. But we've also seen it be so powerful. I know it's been powerful for me as a professional in my learning journey, like being able to listen to the voices of the populations that we want to collaborate with and support. So,
it's a give and take.
It's a give and take. How do you see these barriers impacting children and their development? I thought about this a lot from an early childhood lens, but I'm sure you have some thoughts about it from the social work perspective. I see it as the barriers can create chronic stress for the parents or guardians. And if that is the fight or flight environment that the parents and guardians are in, that's what the children are being raised in. And it's nobody's fault. It's not, blaming the parents or guardians. Nobody can be regulated when they're in fight or flight. So parents are in this state of dysregulation. Now the children are in the state of dysregulation, and prolonged states of that can lead to anxiety, other mental health issues.
Well, and I think it's really important to understand that barriers are not a choice.
No.
And I think
they're no one's fault.
We live in a culture where we can get very blamey.
Yes.
And it's really easy to be like, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And if you would just choose to do this differently, and that's not, our systems are oppressive and they are built to be oppressive. And I think that's really important to understand, because if and I don't want to limit this. I know that, you're a child educator, an advocate, and we both have experience in the autistic community, but I think that this is important for anybody with any barrier, because we all face barriers, even,
absolutely,
and if a billionaire had a child with needs, they'd be able to remove a lot of barriers just with their ability to pay for things and their ability to travel them around the world to get to all the top specialists. And that's not an option for everybody.
Right. For most people.
I just think it's really important for people to hear and understand that barriers aren't a choice. And when there are barriers and people can't access services regularly, they can't, whatever it is, I wish that our care providers and our communities were more compassionate to that, because it's something that I hear a lot in my professional world and across my professional world. That's very blamey.
Yeah, no, I see that too. And I think that parents and guardians see it and hear it and feel it too. And it takes away that feeling of empowerment, and it puts doubt in them. So when they are in a position to advocate for themselves or their kids, they don't, because their feelings have been invalidated for so long that they're like, well, why am I even going to share my opinion, share my feeling, because people aren't going to listen anyway. And then that creates further barriers because they've been silenced.
Yeah. And when you engage in a system that tells you that you aren't doing enough or you're not doing it wrong, you're going to be hesitant to continue to engage in that system.
Yeah. Just like barrier on top of barrier.
Yeah, they are compounding.
Let's see. So next we were going to talk about the role that providers have, and this is across all human service disciplines, like what role we have in supporting families. I see it as a really critical role. And you hit on this already, like families and children, their lives, their behaviors, they're not in a bubble or a vacuum. Like everything is related, and we need to support children and families using a really holistic approach, and thinking about how we provide services is going to look really different, child to child, family to family, community to community. And it really should be informed by multiple disciplines, multiple voices, backgrounds. And I know you had some really good points about almost, I like to almost call them pillars. Like you have like these 4 pillars of what providing support would look like.
Yeah, so my 4 pillars, as Becca has called them, are transparency, communication, ethics, and advocacy and legislation. Because like you said, like there is a micro, which is working with the individual, family, and child or support system. And there's a macro of like, if we do not change these laws, nothing can change.
Right. Yeah, those oppressive systems.
Yeah. So like speaking on transparency and communication, one of the things we talked about was the barriers and butting up against these systems that can be very judgmental and very oppressive and very cold.
Mm-hmm.
And then how are you a person in the bureaucracy who is meeting with your client and providing those services? And I think one of the things that I always tried to bring to my practice when I was a clinical social worker, and something that we have talked a lot about, is when you first meet a client, preparing them for the communication and the relationship that's going to happen. So in my field, I would work a lot with people who were learning how to communicate professionally the first time in our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And to set that up effectively, what I would do is go over exactly what to expect. So and because I would often be meeting with them in a setting that was mandated by the state or the court, what am I going to have to report? What am I not going to have to report?
Right.
And also, if I do something that you are not okay with, I want you to know I'm open to that feedback.
Right.
This is how you report that to me, so that you don't only feel like this is a one-way street.
Right. That you can just report things that make you uncomfortable, but they can't do it in turn.
Mm-hmm.
And that parents feel empowered to say when something doesn't feel right or is uncomfortable, whether it be the service, the way that they're spoken to, maybe they just don't have a good fit with the caseworker or the provider that's been assigned to them, and they should know that they have a place to go and voice those concerns.
And I truly think that when you bring that up first, it tells the family, like, my ego isn't in this. My number one concern is
you,
your goals, and you as a person, and you as a support system for your family and your community.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to hurt my feelings. We can, like, I'm a professional. And if feelings do come up, I want you to address them in whatever way that looks like. It does not need to be with me.
Right. No, I think that's so important. There was a really powerful post about that, Serena from PlaySpark, and she had this beautiful graphic that said, "You can fire your therapist."
Toe hunt. I've done it before. Do it again.
I think that's really important for people to hear. I've worked with a lot of families now in both the early intervention setting, public school setting, ABA clinic setting, and I've heard from parents and guardians and grandparents just this feeling of like, oh, I went along with it because that's what the expert told me. That's what the doctor told me, the teacher told me, the fill in the blank provider told me. And I think if we start in the beginning with this communication of transparency and explaining that our role is a collaborator. And yes, we might have studied X, Y, and Z, but they are the expert on their child and their family. And disabled people are the experts on their disability.
Yes. And there's in social work, one of the key ethics is that the client is the expert of their lives.
I love that.
And that, I think it speaks for itself. Like if they're telling you something isn't going to work, it's not going to work, especially if they're telling you it's not going to work for whatever reason they can't do it. It's not going to work. Or if they're telling you they tried it and they liked it, but now something has changed, we just have to honor that. Like it just,
the right
is
to
what
change
it is.
your mind.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important. And I think that we are people pleasers. I hear it time and time again. I didn't want to hurt their feelings or, I just went along with it or something like that. And I think if the professional came to the conversation more often and just laid it flat out on the table or like called it out when they see it. Like we have so many face-to-face meetings, when you've said something and it like landed weird with a family.
Yeah.
It didn't hit the mark that you were hoping to hit. Call it out, name it. It's our responsibility as the care provider to take ownership of that and be like, hey, so I think I missed the mark. I think I misread something. I can see your demeanor changed, or even like waiting till the next meeting and be like, because you don't always have to call it out in the meeting. Cause I think that people need time to process, but I think it is the care provider's responsibility.
Absolutely. And making that very clear from the start that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to own up to them when we notice them. And we want families to point them out as well. When we've made the mistakes, they can be comfortable to come to us and say that, and letting them know that any service that they provide written consent for, that they can revoke that consent at any time. Totally. I think that's another thing that's not communicated very clearly across, all settings I've worked at, because all of the settings have had very specific legal documents or agreements. They weren't necessarily like legally binding, but some of them were, and some of them were just like, I consent to this, and parents sign it. And it doesn't mean it's forever. You can revoke your signature anytime. You can accept parts of the document and reject others. You can ask for edits. And like you were saying, if even a month from now, you're like, oh, I did agree with this and now I don't, that's okay. You can change your mind.
And can you speak to because I think that part that feels a lot more challenging than it might be is when insurance companies get involved.
Yeah. Are you talking about in regards to like the consent piece and approving different things?
Do you want to talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So for behavior therapy, ABA, when it's insurance-based, there are a lot of requirements as far as documentation. There's a written plan that's known as a treatment plan that outlines an individual's goals during therapy. And those goals typically go anywhere from 3 to 12 months in duration until the plan is renewed. And those plans should have all providers involved that you have released to talk to, whether it be doctors, schools, parents, guardians. Those plans should be really made together as much as possible, or gathering information from those sources and you put it together on your own. But it should really be informed by all of the key players. And once that new plan starts, at any time, if the goals of the child or the family change, they can call a meeting and say, hey, I know we did an assessment and we talked about working on teeth brushing, but right now there's a lot of sensory things going on and I don't want to put my child through a stressful situation of compliance-based teeth brushing. I know dental hygiene is important, but right now they just need to be regulated and feel safe. And that is absolutely in the parents' right. Even when we talk about school-based services, it's a little bit different because it's not insurance-based, but there's a similar plan, the IEP, Individualized Education Plan. same thing. The goals should really be created on this multidisciplinary team. And when I say team, I'm including the parents and guardians. It's not parents and guardians and team. Sometimes the meeting minutes are written as such, and it makes it look like it's family versus school or family versus special ed. And it's really, the team is everybody that's at that table, metaphorically and physically. Like, who is the child's support system. And the IEP is renewed once every year. And there are actually 3 parts on the back that parents and guardians can choose from when they're signing the IEP. So they can check a box that says that they accept the IEP as written and sign. They can reject the IEP as written, or they can accept it with exceptions. And there's several lines where you can actually write which parts you don't accept. Because maybe you accept the majority of it, but there's, one goal that you don't agree with, or an accommodation that you're like, I don't really want physical prompting, or, they outgrew using a visual schedule. I don't want that in there anymore. You can put the parts that you disagree with. And again, you can change your mind at any time. Parents can call IEP meetings before that 1-year mark.
That's really good to know.
Yeah. Hopefully answered your question. I know we both get passionate and then we ramble a little bit. No. Let's see. So we talked about our role of supporting parents and sort of the cornerstones or the pillars. I think next, getting into a little bit more specifics, like what are some of the actual strategies that we can do? And they're going to vary so much, child to child, family to family.
I think the number one strategy that we can do, I don't know how many people watch Ted Lasso out there, but to quote Ted Lasso, be curious and not judgmental.
I love that.
And I think that if you go in being curious about the family and asking those deeper questions, there's going to be stuff that comes up that, like, they come in presenting, and I've seen this 100 times. You've probably seen this 100 times. We've all experienced this in a fight where, like, a thing that something that is like coming up isn't actually the thing.
Yeah.
And so,
right.
If you're curious and you build that rapport and you're that trusted person and you can dig a little bit deeper and you're like, oh, that's actually like that other thing is bigger and we can address it. And I think that happens where if you are going to your therapist for depression, anxiety, and you put them in that box and that's what you think you're going them for, or you're going to the women's shelter for that one thing, or you're going to Becca because of the IEP, and that's what you guys have agreed to talk about, and then you only put everything in those boxes. It's our job to be like, well, you're not in a box, you're a person, so we can address all these other
and they're
options.
all connected.
So I think that our number one job and the number one ways to support families is always being open to suggest that. Like, how many times has a family come to you and been like, oh, I thought that you only did this one thing. And you're like, no, I can totally go to your house and help them with the bedtime routine, or I can totally go to the grocery store with you guys and help you go shopping and figuring that out. Like, it doesn't have to exist in this one way.
Thing. Yeah. And I like what you said about being curious. That really lends itself to a strategy that I've been learning a lot about and trying to internalize with my collaborative process with not only colleagues, but with families, because that rapport building, which I know we're going to get to next, but like having a connection first and coming from that place of curiosity and not judgment. I've been learning about a process called Appreciative Inquiry. And if you come in with more like I statements, like I wonder, I observed, and asking people like what's already working well, that makes all the difference. I had a family that said that completely changed their perspective of a provider they were working with. They initially weren't sure how they felt about this provider. And when the provider led with, what's already working at home. That completely changed their relationship, because now we're really showing the parent and guardian that they're the expert of their life and their kids' lives. And you're coming from that place of like, okay, what's the great things you're already doing? Let's build on it. Yep. Instead of, hey, I'm an expert, I'm the specialist, I'm going to just come in and tell you how to run your life and run your kid's life.
And I think there is a time for us to really be the expert, and it's not in the way that you think it is. We should be responsible for knowing the resources in our community.
Yes.
We should be responsible with having that network, so you can call this organization and be like, Tracy, what's the wait list doing?
Right.
Like, we are responsible for those professional connections. I don't think it's appropriate to be like, grab the brochure on your way out, call them later.
Right.
Like, we should be managing that, because like we said, like, we're here to break down barriers. And one of the things about breaking down barriers is taking like one thing off the to-do list. And especially if it's going to be calling someone to see how long the wait list is, that
we can take that off someone's plate.
that can be heart-wrenching. Or just even knowing what the administration process is to get on the wait list, and like having copies of those applications available.
Right. And sitting with families to fill out the applications, because how many times have I been confused by some of the terminology in the different fields? So I know that parents and guardians must also feel that way.
Absolutely.
And the applications are long, and it's like, how do you make the time to fill them out while you're trying to work and you're taking your kids to school and therapies? Like you said, if we can check one thing off the to-do list. And I don't know, I see our role mostly as being collaborators, which is why my business has collab in the name. Like, the Com Collab came from the Compassion Collaborative, because I want it to be a collaboration between families, myself, OTs, PTs, speech paths, behavior analysts, principals, community members. Like, we're all this kind of village, I guess. Like the old saying, it takes a village. Like, I really think it does.
It really does.
As cheesy as that sounds. But I want it to be a collaborative process, and coming from a place of compassion or curiosity, and not judgment and not compliance. Like, we're not trying to get families or kids to comply. It's like, what are their goals? And if it's truly their goals, they're going to want to do it. We're not trying to contrive and trick them into doing it. Well, and like, what do they want to actually do?
And I think that it's empowering to know, like, you coming from a background of ABA and special ed, me coming from my background in social work, all three of these fields were started under very terrible circumstances. Like, social work started,
a lot of trauma.
Social work started because rich white housewives were bored in New York City, and kids with special needs used to be sent away, never to be seen again.
Right.
And it was advocates and clients and people who had unfortunately been victimized by these fields speaking up time and time again to get these changes made.
Yeah. And there's still so much change.
Oh my gosh, there's still so much change. I mean, there's a legislation going through that, like, trying to get put through the House right now to get it made to be illegal to physically restrain and submit kids to solitude, seclusion. That needs to get signed, because that is not illegal to do to children right now.
Right. It's also still legal in some states to use electric shock as a procedure for behavior intervention. So I think, there's been a lot of progress from a lot of people advocating and being brave and speaking up and collaborating. And there's still a lot of work to do. And really, I know a big passion of both of ours is to empower people in our field, whether it be mentees that we have, supervisees, families, and then even the kids we're working with, where kids are never too young to start those habits to self-advocate. Like, we talk about, how do we teach self-advocacy to kids? How do we teach consent and descent to kids.
And
it's
how
so
do
important.
and from my perspective, like, so important. Teaching adults to listen to kids who are self-advocating is so important.
And it's hard because there is this strange kind of roles that we've fallen into of like the adult knows best.
Because I said so.
Yeah, because I said so. And, we're not knocking anybody. There's a time and a place for boundaries and for demands. Like kids can't always do exactly what they want to do.
No.
But there are times and places where it's like we have to step back as the adult and be like, why did I give that demand? Does it even make sense? Is it teaching a necessary skill? Is it about physical or emotional safety? And if it's not, can we change it?
I mean, I just had this conversation the other day where I, not to toot my own horn, but I'm
go ahead, toot away.
I'm very well spoken. But seriously, in all seriousness, if we are not reflective and seeking constant feedback in our practices, we will do harm. And I don't mean we might do harm.
We will.
I mean, we absolutely will do harm.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for everybody to hear, because I think there's a lot of going back to the roots of our field and present day, and not to knock anybody, but a lot of people get into the field with, and I'm not saying like any one of these fields. I'm saying all these fields, special ed, any sort of human service field, thinking that they are going to save people. And in social work, we have a really, well, I don't know if it's all social work, but in my practice and the communities of social work that I'm in, there is a saying that we support, we don't help, because to help is to do it for you, and to support is to do it next to you.
I love that. And I think you're so right. That constant reflection piece is, I mean, it's invaluable. Like you have to reflect, you have to change. And that goes back to that pillar of transparency, being comfortable. And if you've already built rapport and open communication with families, you should be able to be comfortable to be like, hey, I made a mistake, or we did this intervention for 3 months, and then I learned something that's better, that's more neurodiversity affirming, that's better for reading disabilities, that's better for English language learners, whatever it is. Like, we're supposed to be constantly growing and learning. It's part of the reason why we have to do continuing education and keep going to workshops and trainings. But even outside of that, there's so much professional learning that happens just from talking to colleagues and listening to voices in the community.
And I think it's so important to name that. I'm constantly thinking through a clinical lens, because that is my background. And I'm thinking about how impactful in clinical work, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, like therapy, modeling for our clients how to how we show up in the world and how we deal with vulnerability and how do we treat ourselves when we make mistakes. It can be so important. And I think that like professional vulnerability it really does help build rapport, because you can say, as the person who is writing the treatment plans to anybody, like, I didn't do my best work, I might have caused harm. And to model that for subordinates, for families, because we are human, we do make mistakes, things go wrong.
Yeah.
I think that can be profoundly impactful.
Absolutely. And I think it makes families breathe a sigh of relief. Like, oh, my provider, my child's provider, they're human, just like me. And now when I make a mistake, I don't feel like I have to hide it or be ashamed or embarrassed or not ask for support, because we all need support. We all make mistakes. We're all learning all the time.
Absolutely.
This is like getting a little emotional.
My
eyes getting a little wet.
I can't handle your emotions.
I think we talked a lot about the rapport in some of our other kind of questions and areas.
Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So we have both worked in settings where people don't necessarily, well, I shouldn't say that. I know from my experience, having a lot of my clinical training happen because of some sort of state or legal mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my clients did not want to be there.
Yeah.
And how have you been in that experience, and how have you built rapport in those situations?
That's an interesting question. I've never had people getting my service because of like a state mandated, but I have had kids that definitely didn't want to be pulled out of their classroom and work with me as the special ed teacher.
And I'm thinking about, for those of you who don't know, ABA is one of the only behavioral interventions covered by insurance. So
Yes.
for a lot of families, speaking of barriers, that's the option.
Yeah.
And in New Hampshire, you have an option of like four clinics, depending on where you live, sometimes even less.
Yeah. And a lot of them aren't even clinic based. It's home based.
Right.
So you have to be vulnerable and let people into your home.
Or like school, and then you have like, you're getting this person. And that is your person.
That's your choice, because that's who the contract with the school is with.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think we were trying to talk about just like how to build rapport when the person doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And I think even how you were saying, when you have limited choices, like that can make rapport hard. Like maybe you want that service, but you wanted choices of which provider to work with. So if you're, the only provider, or a provider that was court mandated, or a kid doesn't have as much control over what services they go to, their parent or guardian usually makes that decision, or their school makes that decision. How do you build rapport? I know for me, when students didn't necessarily want to leave class, it's like figuring out the why before you jump to conclusions and blame anybody. It's like, okay, well,
they're being curious.
Yeah, being curious. Like, why don't they want to leave class? Is the time that I'm going there pulling them away from like a favorite subject, when maybe they struggle a lot in, math or reading, and they're in the classroom struggling, and then they love science and I take them away during science. So can I change the time that I work with them? Does it have to be out of the classroom? Are they a child that can work with other visual and auditory distractions? Like, can we work in the classroom? Can they have a peer join our group and work together? Can I be more in the background and give them the tools that I'm just checking in and making sure they know how to use the tool? Maybe they don't even have to miss class at all. And if all of those things are not the case, and they really do need to leave with me for services, like, what can we do before we get to the hard stuff of why they're leaving the classroom? Like, they're a kid first, with interest, with strengths. So start there. What do they love to do? What are their strengths? I had a fifth grader when I taught special ed in public school, and he, bless you, he was getting support for writing. And he really struggled with putting his ideas together. And then the fine motor piece was really challenging for him. So we ended up, to help generate ideas, he was great at drawing. So I had him draw. He came in and I was like, what do you want to draw? He drew a ton of pictures, and then we used the pictures as inspiration for his writing.
Ooh, I love
and
that.
We practiced different tools that could make the writing part easier. We tried speech to text, and we tried, keyboarding. He would dictate sometimes and I would write it, and we'd take turns writing. So I think really it's a lot of strategies I just threw out there, but to summarize it, look at the why. Why does this child, family, person maybe not want to work with you? Figure out the why and how you can change the environment to support them. And then follow their lead. I think using people's strengths and interests. And when I say using them, I mean truly investing in that person's strengths and interests, not dangling it as a carrot. Not like, hey, do this thing for me, and then we get to do this thing that you love. I mean, like truly investing in it, not having it as a reward or a dangling carrot. and even having it happen simultaneously with things you might not care for. I don't think it has to be like a first then. It can be a during. If like with teeth brushing, if that's hard for a lot of kids we worked with. Like, can they watch the Elmo video while they're brushing their teeth instead of after? It's like, well, they can do it during, or, you know, get a toothbrush for their doll and they brush their doll's teeth while you're brushing their teeth. Like, we have to get creative. We have to figure out the why. That was a really long answer, but it's complex.
It is complex.
It's going to be different for each person.
I was reflecting about when I worked with middle schoolers, who are my bread and butter population. I love a middle schooler. I think they're so fun. And part of what I found for them, and what I found for a lot of my clients who were, you know, going into that young adulthood, is kind of just owning that, yep, this is hard, and I know you don't want to be here. Yeah. And I totally get why you don't want to be here. Yes. And what can we do to make it more enjoyable? Yeah. And if you have the space, which very thankfully I did have the space, using the first couple of sessions to do nothing. To no expectations. Just invest in them. And I love that. Just focus on that rapport, because the situation can suck and you guys can still have a good relationship, because sometimes the best camaraderie comes from being like, yeah, this sucks. Joint misery. Misery loves company. And middle schoolers love misery and company. Yeah. No, I think those are all really, really good points. I know we wanted to talk too about this concept of wraparound services, which I know is a term used in social work. Yeah. So I'll have you start, and then I'll kind of say how that applies to settings outside of social work. Yeah. So in social work, and a lot of, and like hospitals too, you will, holistic care and wraparound services, those are things you'll hear a lot. Multi-disciplinary teams is another term for anything like that. And it essentially just refers to that people do not exist in a vacuum, like we talked about before. And that you might have a kid who has a social worker and a case manager and a speech path and a special educator, or, you know, the same way that if you go to the hospital, you might have a lung specialist and a heart specialist and a brain specialist all working together. Right. And it's about coordinating that care. So all of the treatment plans align and are in coordination. No one is working on conflicting goals. Yeah. So important. And it's something we see a lot. It's like working in the fields that we do, and something that happens to parents all the time. Like, how many times have my mom used to say it all the time, like, I can't believe you are a perfect angel at school and this is the kid I get. Because we show up different places as different people. We do it. And things change across systems and structures and settings. And if we are not coordinating that care, if we are not making sure that everyone is working together and bringing all of their expertise and their perspectives, including experts, including the caregivers and those community supports, we're doing a disservice. Yeah, we're gonna miss a mark. We're either gonna have the conflicting services or goals, or using an ineffective strategy altogether. And something that was wild to me when I made the transition, because when I did my clinical social work stuff, I mainly worked in a very tight-knit community and a residential program. And in the residential program, we had in-house family education and training. Okay. We had in-house GED and extending education. In-house, we had psychiatrics, clinicals, case managers, transitional housing. So the idea of a treatment team was so concise and a well-oiled machine. And I really was spoiled in that setting. And then moving, into my very tight-knit community where we partnered with the schools.
Right.
We partnered with the families. We knew the people, I did work with a lot of high-risk youth, so we knew a lot of the police officers, knew a lot of those systems really well, and we all worked together all the time. And something that really boggled my brain moving out of those systems is how
places that work in isolation.
Places that work in isolation.
I knew that's what you're going to say, because it's such a weird
juxtaposition.
Literally took the word out of my mouth. That's why we're best friends. No, I was thinking the same thing. Like, there were school teams that I worked on where it was almost beyond multidisciplinary to where it was almost transdisciplinary, where we would train each other so well that, yes, we weren't going to use another field's assessment, or we weren't going to make those recommendations at a meeting.
But you knew what you didn't know.
But we knew what we didn't know. We knew what questions we might ask if something we were doing wasn't going right. It's like, oh, well, maybe it's related to this other bodily system that we're not as familiar with, but we can go ask the OT. Or, we knew enough that we could carry over interventions so that child wasn't only getting the 30 minutes of speech, right? Like, they were getting 30 minutes from a really skilled speech pathologist, but then we could support that carryover in other settings so that they were getting speech all day, every day, so to speak. And not just, hey, no pun intended.
I was going to let it go away.
Instead of just that 30 minutes. So I think that the wraparound services, what that looks like in schools, is just being so close in collaboration that you can carry over services from other disciplines.
And I do think that it is, I think that rural is a barrier, because it is easier when you're in an urban setting. Like when I was in Burlington, Vermont, or anywhere in New Hampshire, urban, but jokes. But it's easier when those people are next door.
Right.
And it's
not an hour drive to the other specialist.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of networking opportunities, and even professionals have barriers too.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it is vital. And I think that it's one of the other barriers I see for professionals is that, the people that work at the organizations understand their craft really well. The people that run the organization are business people, and they understand their craft really well.
Right.
And it takes both to make something successful, because if you have a bunch of special ed teachers or a bunch of social workers trying to run
but you don't have the principal or the clinical director, it's like it all falls apart.
Yeah, if no one orders toilet paper, we are done.
If no one hires new staff or makes the handbooks, like everyone
remembers to get HR
role
to send the paychecks. But it does take a mutual understanding.
Yeah, that everybody's job is complex and everybody's bringing strengths and challenges to the table. Yeah, it's so hard. I think one of the things I didn't put in the notes, but it's like, how do you make sure that collaboration is happening? It's like, we talked about what it should look like, but I think something that's missed often is intentionally scheduling time for that collaboration. If it's not in your daily, weekly, monthly schedule, it's not going to happen.
And I think that one of the things that I wanted to touch on from a professional standpoint, because I do not think that it is the family or the client's job to make sure this is happening. And I don't want to put it on them.
Nope. I agree.
But I think that it is the care provider's job to keep somewhere in the back of their mind that while this isn't going to be on anyone's to-do list, because it's not something that insurance is going to require, it's probably not something that their business and they might require, but not to the intensity that would be
most beneficial,
best practice.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's not going to be on most to-do lists anywhere. It really is about going the extra mile. and that it is vital, and the things that are going to get done when we bring in people who know the client from different settings,
we get a whole picture now.
We get a whole picture, and it could change the goal. It could accelerate the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never seen anything bad come from coordination of care. Like yes, you might have more cooks in the kitchen, so there might be disagreements, of course. Like we're only human. We're going to have different opinions and perspectives. But overall, I've only ever seen it, be like a growth mindset. Because you're just adding more strengths to the table.
And I think
more
it's
tools to the toolbox.
It can be overwhelming because I think it really does, if you are not in a setting where all these people are naturally and they're not all already going to a meeting for that kid, I think that schools are a wonderful resource in that way because those stakeholders do have to go to the IEP.
Yep.
And, not necessarily in other settings, but it doesn't need to be an all or nothing. It doesn't need to be a big meeting where you're getting 15 people on board at once.
No.
It can be an email chain or like just making
a shared Google Doc.
A shared Google Doc or just making sure that someone gets CC'd every time.
Yeah.
And I think that it can be overwhelming, like trying to fold all your laundry at once. But if you put away like 10 t-shirts every day, it makes it more manageable.
Yeah, no, I love that you said it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There was a speech path that I was talking to the other day who created a Google Doc, and she just shared it across the speech department.
Another way technology is breaking down barriers.
Yes, because we can share documents, email, we can zoom into calls when maybe the provider's an hour away, and we wouldn't otherwise have that collaboration time. Something that I've been advocating for the families and kids that I work with, and this is part of the special ed process. So on one of the pages of the IEP, there's a part that talks about services. And it's pretty standard that the people who are in the school or contracted directly with the school, they always make it onto that service page. Like no questions. Totally. They're going to be on that page. But I've been advocating with families to, is there a provider outside of the school that you feel it would be critical that the school has their perspective? And whoever that person is, write it into the IEP. 30-minute consult a month with primary care provider. 30-minute consult with child's therapist, with their BCBA, private BCBA, whoever it happens, their social worker.
That's where being curious, it comes in because I think I've never been in the position of writing an IEP. I've never been a stakeholder in that situation, but I imagine based off my similar experiences that it's really easy to look at the list and be like, we have
everybody's on there.
Everyone's on there because
you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. So asking, that should be something that providers are already asking the parents. And I think that while I want to be very clear, I do not think that it is the guardians or the community supporting the child to do that work. But if you have that rapport with the family, I think they'll be more comfortable coming up to you and be like, you forgot Dr. Horowitz.
Right. I love the name example too.
Thanks.
I think we both wanted to touch a little bit on not only is this, best practice in our own experience, but that it's part of a lot of disciplines like code of ethics or handbooks. So I know my background in behavior analysis as a board certified behavior analyst, we have a pretty lengthy code of ethics. And one of the categories is actually titled collaborating with colleagues. And I'm going to read verbatim what the ethics code says. It says behavior analysts collaborate with colleagues from their own and other professions in the best interests of clients and stakeholders. Behavior analysts address conflicts by compromising when possible and always prioritizing the best interests of the client. Behavior analysts document all actions taken in these circumstances and their eventual outcomes. So, it's right in our code of ethics. And again, it's going to take some intentionality on our parts to carve out that time, because although insurance asks us to do coordination of care. They don't make it very easy on us because a lot of that coordination is not billable or easily put into caseload schedules. So it really takes us advocating, like, no, this is in the best interest of the client, just as the code of ethics says. So we have to make this time and get creative about how that might work, whether it's over Google Meet or Zoom, conference call, emails, and thinking if there is this pressure, unfortunate pressure of billable, how can we make it work? I know that including families should be happening anyway, and if the families are present, it can be part of a billable service. So just getting creative so that we can have that collaboration time. I know you said that there's a similar ethics code for social work, and they also talk about collaboration.
Yes, there is. I don't know it word for word.
I typed it before, and I wouldn't have known it word for word either.
No, but there is, and it talks about, it's less, it's very similar, but it's less jargony because the expectation is that we're already doing it. So it's more about how, like, it's very, like, black and white. Like, how do you show up? You only share the information that is absolutely necessary for everyone on that team to complete their jobs. But I think that's written that way because the expectation is that, like, we don't need to tell you to do this. You're already going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And there are instances in social work where you won't be doing that, like private practice clinical work. It's not necessarily an expectation for every client, but if you are in a school or you're in a hospital or you're in any sort of system, and even some aspects of private practice, this is the expectation that if you see it in the best interest of the client to start coordinating care with other providers, that is what you will do.
Yeah. And I think that is what it should always be centered around. Is this coordination supporting the family and supporting the child? And I think sometimes that's a hard question to answer, especially when we get into those gray areas of, both of our fields were mandated reporters. And so sometimes coordination of care means looping in people that in the long run is probably for the best interest of the family, but in the moment feels really horrible for everybody involved.
In a lot of the organizations I've worked for in the past, and even ones that this was not the standard, but I would do it anyways, unless I believed that it would cause absolute danger to the child, I would tell families that I had done this, that I was going to make the call, unless I believed that was going to ultimately put the kid or the person, didn't always have to be a kid, in more risk.
And that's that transparency piece.
That's the transparency. And I've had situations where it hasn't been, I know, like, we are so much, without saying, talking about DCYF, DCF in Vermont. But there have been self-harm statements that I've reported to families, but I've also told them, like, I'm telling you this, I'm obviously telling you this,
right?
But I'm going to send you home with resources, and I'm going to call these resources as well to let them know to be expecting you. And that is, again, like, taking that off the families, taking that off the community providers, and not really not to say not giving them a choice, because that's not what it is, but, like, that's an overwhelming experience. In my experiences where kids and teens have made statements of self-harm, that is an unbelievable conversation to be having with a parent. And it's incredibly, like, feels like an overpowering, hopeless situation, and to be able to say, like, these are the resources and I've already called them, so you can meet them here, they can come right now, or I can call them back and we can set up a time for them to come to your home. What do you
taking that off their plate?
But yeah, again, like, it doesn't need to be like, and they might not want to talk to you. I think we've both been in situations where we have told that to a family and they have gotten rightfully very angry. And I think it comes from getting blamed for those barriers in the past.
Right. And we talked about those oppressive systems.
And it can be very stigmatizing.
Yes.
And there's a lot of misinformation out there, but I would rather have someone be mad at me and know that they need to be like, I'm the one that did it. I'm going to take responsibility. If I'm making this call, I'm taking responsibility instead of they think poor Dr. Howowitz did it and they're going to stop going to him.
Right. No, and that, I think sometimes that is being the support for families, is letting them be mad at you.
Yeah.
I know we talked about like blamey, like we all can be blamey, but I think in those really tough situations, like if how we can support a family is be someone to blame to help them get through a tough moment, like I'm okay with that.
And I think that I actually don't know what your practice around this is, but in like my experience, we would go over the documents with the families first. Like I am a mandated reporter.
Yep.
If you or someone in your family says these types of things to me,
I have to report it.
I have to report it. And making that very kid friendly, like saying like, I can't keep secrets. There are things that I need to report. And I've been to trainings about that and telling them like, if this is reported, this is what I will do. No, and I've even had people, I've told families like, I'm going to make this phone call and have them want to be there with me when I make that phone call.
Yeah. That's very open.
And I think it's really important. And I think it does. It's a big thing for them. But so in your practice, because you are a mandated reporter, is that a part of your practice?
It's not something that is laid out for teachers or behavior analysts. But I think it's something that people can adopt in their own like personal philosophy around it. Like, yes, we're mandated reporters, but as far as trainings go or kind of guidelines, it's just like, you should report things that you think is putting someone in danger or putting others in danger. But I've never had great training around like, how do you actually do it? And how do you talk to families about it?
And I do want to caveat that my situation is very different. And I did have to report things that not everyone would have to report because of the system I worked in and my family's being there already in those systems.
Yeah.
So I do want to caveat that. Like, I don't think that most people have had parents make calls with them.
No, probably not.
I do want to highlight that, but I do think I value that experience greatly.
Yeah. And it brings me back to earlier in the conversation when you said it's about supporting, not helping. Like, you were sitting with the families in that. It wasn't you like being sneaky and doing something behind their back to help them.
Yeah.
Like, you were in it with them. You're like, I'm going to be transparent. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. You can listen to me make the call, look at the forms with me. Like, it really keeps that close-knit relationship, even when things get tough.
Well, and I think it really there's a lot of anxiety around reporting, especially to DCF, DCYF. And nobody ever wants to feel like someone's talking about them.
No.
Regardless of the situation.
Correct. I think a really good positive to end on, we wanted to offer what we know for resources, particularly New Hampshire, a little bit New England, and then the greater community of the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
But you found a really great one that maybe you want to talk about first, Mallory.
Yeah. So for New Hampshire specifically, because I wish that we could sit here and list off resources for the whole world.
Yeah.
But we will get into like how to evaluate resources, and doing that inventory for yourself and your family. But if you're in New Hampshire Family Voices, which is linked in the description, has a beautiful, comprehensive list for every not every, but almost every resource that a family might need, from
Yeah.
Alzheimer's to diabetes to bullying to autism
Breastfeeding.
to breastfeeding, educational help.
Yeah.
Literally, like, almost every single service in the state is listed there. It can be overwhelming because it's essentially the phone book. And I cannot speak to the reputableness or the views of each one of those services in there. But if you are like,
where do I even start?
I just got diagnosed with diabetes and I don't know what to do, this might be a good place to start.
Yeah, good jumping off point.
So that's in the description below.
Yep. Yeah, the YouTube video description, there's the link to New Hampshire Family Voices. And then after I can go back and edit the description too and put other resources that we talk about. A lot of them are social media related, because as isolating as the internet can be sometimes, one of the great things about it is the community outpour and outreach about disability, neurodivergence, medical complexities, marginalized groups. I mean, there is so much love, support, and pride on social media for so many groups of people.
And it's so wonderful to be able to hear these authentic voices from so many different communities, especially living in rural New Hampshire, where it can be extremely limiting.
Yeah. So now we have the whole world,
and now we have the whole world. I've met so many people who are living lives not even on the same planet as me, like bananas. And I think it's just a wonderful tool.
It is. And it's been a really interesting tool for me as I've moved away from public school and ABA clinics and branching out, working as an independent consultant. It can be kind of lonely sometimes that I don't have colleagues right in the building or the office to be like, hey, this is going on. This is something that I'm working on with a family. I don't have people that I can talk to about that.
Your best friend works in a phone-free clinic.
Especially with, protection of families' confidentiality. But being able to just talk about the field as a whole, social media has been amazing for that. And for that collaboration and multidisciplinary piece, like because of the power of Facebook and Instagram, I've been able to talk to speech pathologists, OTs, BCBAs. I just did an Instagram live the other night with a mother raising a disabled and medically complex child, like learning about disability categories that I knew very little about. So it's very empowering. And it's easy enough to search. Like, again, it can be overwhelming at first, but going on social media, just looking up hashtags that are related to what you're trying to learn more about, the diagnosis you or your child might have just received, or a special ed topic, typing in different hashtags and tags. I will link some groups, I think, in the description. I think that would be helpful.
Well, and I think that one of my things when I'm talking about how to find resources besides Google, because it can be very overwhelming to get 18 bajillion pages, and you can essentially make the internet say whatever you want it to say.
Right. So you're going to find pros and cons and for and against for every single thing you could look up.
Gosh, literally everything. And if you're going in not knowing what you don't know, that can be a very adversive experience.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I talk about when trying to find resources is creating a list of questions based off an internal inventory off of your needs, your beliefs, your ideals.
Yes.
To assess providers' readiness to serve you in a way that you need best. So
I love that.
For me, my questions would be like, what are your beliefs on, if we're talking about autistic kids, like what are your beliefs on play? If we're talking about me as a person going to the doctor, what are your beliefs on antibiotics?
Yeah.
And just
questions around your own personal beliefs.
Yeah. And things like that. And I really want to plug TikTok. I know you're not a TikTok fan.
It's okay.
But it is a great app.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of advocacy
There's
going
a
on
lot
there.
of advocacy going on, and it's really great because like the algorithm, once you get in there and you create your For You page the way that you want it to be, it will push like-minded people to you, and then you can start to passively learn what you didn't know. And then you can start developing those questions to make sussing through Google a lot less overwhelming. To find out the questions you didn't even know you could ask, because it can be, like I said, it's a barrier coming into this, whatever this is, whatever the diagnosis is, whatever you're currently needing, like realizing that you have anxiety and that now you want to go seek a clinician. What questions do you ask?
Yeah, sometimes you don't have the list of questions yet even. It's like, what questions should I have?
I mean, like I am someone who struggles with anxiety, and I am someone who went to school for social work. And when my anxiety first started to get really bad, I was like, I don't even know how to handle this, because professionals have a hard time doing that work for themselves as well. So how can we expect anyone else to do it?
Absolutely. I found a really similar experience when I was trying to track some of my own behaviors that I wanted to increase and decrease. And I'm like, wow, I didn't take data on that for like 5 days. And yet I've asked families to track all these things for me. Like, it's not realistic. And it's a good test to see like what is a realistic thing to ask of a family and what strategies look great in a textbook, but not in reality.
Being reflective of your practice.
Being reflective.
But yeah, so I would suggest social media as a way to, and start creating those lists of values and needs for those different providers. And that way, when they're coming in the room and they're giving you that pitch, it might sound all fine and dandy. I mean, and I would suggest this, like I have this when I go on job interviews. Like, what do I need from a job interview? I know that I like teamwork. I know that I like
you're interviewing them just as much.
Yeah, holistic care, and you do not need to accept the first offer.
Right.
Negotiations, people.
I think that those are all great points. I think the only different thing that I would add to that is if you do join groups on social media, like maybe a Facebook group about the change that you're going through, the diagnosis that you received. There are often people who are on 5 steps ahead on this similar journey that you're about to go on. And a lot of them remember step 1 and want to help and are offering to help. So being brave and seeing if someone that's already been through a similar thing is willing to give you a resource that worked for them, or go with you to a meeting. I know that some of the moms that I've talked to who are in the medically complex community, raising children with multiple medical diagnoses, they've reached out and been like, yeah, I'll go with you to your child's first appointment. Like, I remember how scary that is. So leaning on your community, because there are people out there that are going to say, hey, I remember when I went through that 3 months ago, 3 years ago, like, I'll go with you, or here's the phone number to the specialist I went to, or here's this really great website I went to. So leaning on others who have already lived similar experiences can be really helpful.
And I know that, it's, everyone knows this, but I do think it's worth saying, making sure you are responsible with the information that you're sharing on social media. Like, I think it would be irresponsible of us to be suggesting social media and not caveat that.
No, I think that that's very true. Really, it's hard. It's hard to sift out, for lack of a better term, fact or crap.
Yeah.
Like, you go in with a critical lens to any content you're reading, even research articles. Like research, yes, there's scientific methods, but that doesn't mean that is the method for you or your family or your child. Like there's going to be pros and cons, risks and benefits to everything. So knowing both sides is always helpful. But I loved doing this. I love talking to my best friend about our passions and helping and supporting families and kids. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, or you have a great resource that you would want other viewers to know about, feel free to drop a comment. And as I said, I will go back and put some other resources in the description. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.